Hello everyone, welcome back for another video. As we've all seen in Canada, things haven't been going so well over the last decade or so. And you could say that the fault lies on the federal Liberal government, and 99% you'd be correct. And so today, we're talking about the other 1% reason that I believe Canada might be kind of locked into a bad deal, and why we kind of have our hands tied and are in one way imprisoned from actually reaching our full potential. So today's video is a very interesting topic, and we're going to talk about what would happen if Canada were to leave the British Commonwealth and abolish the British monarchy.
Today we turn a page. With unity, with respect, and with hope, we claim our own path forward. Canada stands as an independent nation.
Okay, so let's jump into it. And of course, once again, we are using the help of our trusty sidekick, ChatGPT. I know I've been using this a lot, but at the same time, it does summarize notes very well, and it makes it a little bit easier to go through each step in the detail necessary to essentially explain to you guys exactly what would happen. So the first part of this here that we're going to go through is just going through what Canada currently is and how it currently operates. So before we can establish what would happen once Canada leaves the British Commonwealth, we have to look at what Canada is currently. And so Canada right now is a constitutional monarchy, right? With the king, formerly the queen, as the head of state. And in Canada, in the parliamentary system, the king is represented by the governor general. So if we were to abolish the monarchy, that would mean that Canada would essentially become a republic, which means Canada replaces the king with a Canadian head of state, likely a president or a similar figure, kind of like what the US has. The prime minister and parliament would still run government, and the system would resemble something ChatGPT is resembling Ireland or Germany and not so much the US, but realistically it would actually resemble more the US. So that point we're going to ignore because ChatGPT is still kind of holding a left-wing bias and isn't always 100% accurate. So the second part of this to recognize is that there would be massive constitutional hurdles. And this is part of the biggest barrier as to why Canada will likely never leave the British Commonwealth. Because to abolish the monarchy, Canada would need unanimous consent under the Constitution, so the House of Commons, the Senate, and all 10 provincial legislatures would have to agree. And this is the highest constitutional threshold possible. And why is this difficult? Well, for one, provinces disagree on almost everything, which is true. Quebec, Alberta, and Indigenous nations would all demand concessions. As you see, Alberta already is demanding concessions as of 2026. We are already looking at leaving what is known as Canada. And Quebec has obviously in the past, they've held 2 referendums. Both obviously have failed, but this would obviously beg the question of that coming back up in Quebec as it currently is in Alberta. And any attempt to do so could reopen constitutional battles that haven't been seen since the 1980s and 1990s, or in Alberta that haven't been seen since 2026. And in reality, this actually could derail the process indefinitely because it would create a landlock in government. It would create a landlock between the provinces to actually come up to some type of agreement as to how to move forward, because you'd have those rifts in Alberta and Quebec and potentially other provinces as well. So the next thing here is the legal and institutional changes. So if it somehow passed that Canada were to leave the British Commonwealth, there would need to be a rewrite of references to the Crown in thousands of laws. So we'd have to redefine the Governor General, the provincial lieutenant governors, the oaths of office, the crown lands, the courts operating in the name of the crown. Courts would still function, but the legal foundation of the courts in Canada would have to be obviously completely rewritten. The next part of this is a controversial topic in Canada right now, but it has to be addressed. And it's the Indigenous treaties and rights, which is somewhat of a critical issue. And many Indigenous treaties are between First Nations and the Crown, not the Canadian government. Abolishing the Crown would raise serious questions. Do treaties automatically transfer to the new state? Would Indigenous nations need to reconsent? Could this trigger legal challenges or renegotiations, which I believe it would? And most experts believe treaties would carry over, but politically and legally, it would be extremely volatile. And let's talk about actually leaving the British Commonwealth. There is currently actually a list of countries that are part of the British Commonwealth. I can't name them off the top of my head, but I'll put something up on the screen so you guys can see all the countries that are actually included in the Commonwealth of Nations. So, abolishing the monarchy in Canada does not automatically mean leaving the Commonwealth. Good examples are India, Ireland, Trinidad, and Tobago are republics and former Commonwealth members. Canada could remain for diplomatic and trade reasons, but if Canada did leave, it would be a minimal economic impact. There'd be loss of some diplomatic forums and mostly symbolic consequences, basically meaning that Canada would no longer be represented by the British royal family, no longer be under the rule of the king or under Queen's rule as it used to be, and essentially be a truly sovereign and independent nation. The next part of this that could potentially be a problem is national identity and political fallout. So there could be fierce national debate. Quebec could potentially, like we mentioned before, use its leverage for constitutional changes. Western provinces could demand reforms, which they kind of already do, as we're seeing in Alberta. And of course, renewed separatist or autonomy movements, which no change in Alberta right now. We could see it come in Saskatchewan, we could see it come in BC at that point, being that a lot of the Western provinces don't get the same attention that the Eastern ones do. And this could become the largest political realignment since Confederation, which we all know, if you don't, was in 1867 for Canada. Now, here's what wouldn't change, all right? So despite all the drama that this could cause, your rights wouldn't disappear. You'd still have those, so don't go whining about that. There would still be elections. The provinces would still exist as far as we know. Canada wouldn't become authoritarian or American style overnight. As a matter of fact, Canada would not become authoritarian at all. As a matter of fact, we'd be moving further away from becoming authoritarian because the current administration in Canada is very much so authoritarian if you look at all the laws being passed. So even for ChatGPT to say this, we'd actually be better off. We wouldn't be under authoritarian rule. We'd actually be closer to what a democracy is supposed to resemble. And most changes would be symbolic and legal, not necessarily practical, which again, I disagree with. It would be better off. Here's the bottom line. Canada, in theory, could abolish the monarchy and become a republic. In practice, the constitutional hurdles are enormous. The political risk is massive. Indigenous treaty implications are complex. The process could destabilize national unity, which right now there isn't a whole lot to begin with. And this is why, even with declining public attachment to the monarchy, no federal government seriously pursues it. Although if you were to put me in power, it'd be one of my first things. So that's, in a nutshell, what would happen with Canada leaving the British Commonwealth. I personally believe that it would make Canada better off, a more respected nation. We'd have more control over just about everything, and ultimately could become a freer, more prosperous nation without having the ties to the British monarchy or the British Commonwealth. We could openly pursue trade with multiple countries. We'd have probably a better working relationship with our allies south of the border with the United States. Of course, with this video, don't freak out or anything. This is just a hypothetical situation, and I'm just kind of going over and talking what exactly it would look like if it were to happen. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video, like this video, and make sure you also check out the merch shop for my podcast to help us keep the lights on over there. We have quite a few exciting guests coming up. But until then, see you next time. Thanks for watching.